Hi, welcome to Sleepy Jean. I've got a new book today called Beyond Recall by Robert Goddard. Hope it helps you sleep. In fond memory of Terry Green, friend, colleague, and boon companion, on whom time was called far too early. Today, the air is different here, pure somehow. The light is clearer. The edges of the leaves and the lines of the buildings are sharp as the memories recollections invades my senses through the unchanged brightness of this place called home. I raise the window in the evening, cool and sweetly washed by late afternoon rain. I touch the wood and test the paintwork with my thumb. I watch a rabbit, disturbed but not startled by the squeak of the sash, hop away into the trees. The direction of this leisurely retreat draws my eyes towards St. Clement's Hills, where I can make out the roofs of Truro School, and just to the north the white dots that could be sheep in a field but for the regularity of their spacing, sheep safely grazing rather than the headstones of the dead resting forever on a familiar hillside. I didn't ask for an East fancy room. I didn't let slip my connection with Treadwell House when I booked in. I didn't even disguise my name. The receptionist was too young to remember anyway. Probably too young even to care. Pure chance, then, puts me here in this particular room where my great uncle keeps his vast old daybeds and his jumble of assaying equipment and his battered leather trunks and cases laid out as if in readiness for journey. Maybe he rests there, listening to the cooing of the doves and sniffing the summer air before setting out that last time nearly 50 years ago, just up there, half a mile away at most. His bones are just beneath a slab of Cornish granite. I stood beside it a few hours ago, waiting to be met, waiting, but also willing to be forced to remember. I read the inscription, cursory and recitant, declaring just a little as propriety demanded, and the thought of how carefully my grandmother would have chosen the wording, brevity and seamlessness. I imagine they're saying to the monumental mason, his name, Joshua George Cunniworth, his dates, 1873 to 1947, the customary initials RIP. That I rather think will suffice. And you must have thought it would, mustn't you, Gran? You must have been so confident, even when your own life ebbed away 25 years later. No cold grave on a windy hilltop for you, of course, but neat hygienic cremation. Well, something can't be burned or even buried. You must have thought that could be, but you were wrong. Only you're not here to face that fact, are you? I am. I was early for my appointment at the cemetery, not by much, but early enough to recover my breath after the climb and draw some calmness from the scene. The wind was up, heralding the rain that hasn't yet arrived. The speeding clouds shifted the sunlight around the city below me, lighting first the single copper spire of the cathedral, then its taller central tower, then the long pale line of the viaduct, and the deep green fields beyond, and finally closer to a bright flood of birds above the cemetery chapel, tossed up in the breeze like a handful of shingles on a gale-ripped beach, lit and seen and swiftly lost. The houses have crept up the slopes around the cemetery until Uncle Joshua was buried, crept up unsuspected like some besieging enemy by night, unnoticed until suddenly perceived. The thought struck me just as I saw her approaching up the path, walking fast and straight, anonymously dressed, thinner and gauntier and older than when we'd last met. She stopped a few feet away and stared at me, breathing steadily. Hostility, if it was there, was expertly masked. But what else could I have expected? She'd always worn a mask. I just hadn't always known it. You've aged well, she said neutrally. Still off the drink, as a matter of fact, yes. That must be it then, unless it's the effect of marriage and fatherhood. How did you find out? I made it my business too. Where are they, your wife and son? Switzerland. Handy for the banks, I imagine. Is that what this is about, money? What else? I'm sure. Didn't they pay you enough for these imaginary memories of yours? Not enough to keep me indefinitely in the manner I'm accustomed to. You mean you've run through it all? Something like that. Well, bad luck. You'll get nothing from me. I'll get as much as I need from somebody, you or the highest bidder, and I think the bidding will go pretty high for the story I have to tell. Don't you? Maybe. It's the truth. If the truth gets out, a lot of people are going to look very stupid, worse than stupid in your case. That's why I'm willing to keep my mouth shut. At a price. What price? Half of what I stood to net last time. You can afford it. Just half. Isn't that fair? No, not in the least. I'll give you 24 hours to think it over. Me here this time tomorrow with your answer. Why here? Because this is one grave. I know the exact location. She almost smiled then. It would have been an admission that something beyond greed and envy were at work, but the admission never quite came. I don't believe you have the courage to drag it all into the open now. I don't need courage, just a lack of alternatives. I've had to scrape by on a budget lately, leading the kind of dull, deadening life I swore I never would. Well, I've had enough of that, and this is the only way to escape it. Isn't it better than prison? Oh, I've no intention of going back there. With what the papers will pay me for the truth, I can leave the country and become a different person. You know how good I am at that. Yes, I do. But that's not an option for you, is it? Now you are a committed family man. Think about it. We made a deal before. We can make another. It's simple enough. If you really believe, I believe anything you say. Now you might look back on a rather foolish when you've had a chance to weigh up the options. Take my word for it. I've been weighing them for a long time, and I get 24 hours to do the same. Exactly generous in the circumstances. She held my gaze for a moment. Whether she felt the same strange complicity with me as I felt with her, I had no way of telling, and I'll never have dared to ask for fear of the answer. We set ourselves up for this years ago by agreeing, however reluctantly, to share and conceal the truth. What is a secret without trust but a bargain without waiting to be broken? Until tomorrow, she added. I nodded. Until tomorrow. So there it is. The threat I've lived with since we struck our deal. The dilemma I'd like to pretend I didn't anticipate. Well, if it had to happen, let it happen. Here and now. There's no more fitting place or time, and I have until tomorrow to reach a decision. Who needs more than that? I look from the window down at the sloping flank of the lawns and listen to the roar of the traffic accelerating up the hill. I remember a time when there was so little of it. You could hear a single car cross Boscawen Bridge and labour up the road towards the isolation hospital, just as I remember a time when I knew nothing of the truth about Uncle Joshua's death except the little that the average newspaper reader on the Clapham omnibus knew. For more than 30 years as child and man, I inhabited that happy state. Then early one Sunday morning in September 1981, on the path near the rhododendrous downs there, where my gaze lingers, I caught my first sight, partially blocked by undergrowth. A bob brought this phase of my life to an abrupt and horrifying end, and set the next in motion, moving towards this day and tomorrow. I lower the window and shut out the noise, but not the memories. They rush in and surround me as I slowly cross the room and lie down on the bed and close my eyes, the better to confront them. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not running away. I have until tomorrow to relive them all, as it seems I must before I decide. Yesterday. Chapter 1. By December 1981, the murder of my great-uncle Joshua Carnworth has ceased to be a shocking and lamented blow to Truro's peaceful image of itself. 34 years had transmuted it into a quaint footnote of civic history. Most of the many things said about it at the time had been forgotten, and all of the passions stirred had been dissipated. It wasn't that nobody remembered, it was just that nobody cared enough to call the events to mind. 3 decades of the affluent society had cast the rationed pleasures and abundant pains of 1947 into relative antiquity, and with them the memories of those who failed to outlive the year. Even within the family, of which old Josh had been a semi-detached member, his name was seldom mentioned. Some of us lived in his house, all of us, to varying degrees, prospered thanks to the fortune of my grandma and inherited from him, while most of us had trained ourselves to pretend he'd played no real part in transforming the Napiers from humble shopkeepers into company directors and absentee hoteliers. He hadn't attended to, after all. He hadn't wanted to shower his wealth on us. He probably had been outraged that his murder should have such a consequence. To that extent, perhaps our neglect of his memory was justified. Perhaps anything beyond collective indifference would have been like dancing on the grave. That's how I'd have defended it if I had to. But then I was amongst the least witting of his beneficiaries. I thought I knew the whole story, but I didn't know the half of it. I thought I remembered it exactly as it had been, but what I remembered was a cunningly wrought fiction that had worn dangerously thin without anyone noticing, and by September 1981 it had reached breaking point. Saturday the 5th of September was the day my niece Tabitha Rutherford was to marry Dominic Beale, a good-looking and highly eligible young merchant banker. It was also by happy contrivance my parents' golden wedding anniversary. A full-scale family celebration was therefore arranged. The wedding was to be at St. Mary's Clement Methodist Church in the centre of Truro, followed by a reception at Trudower House. Since my grandmother's death, the family home had been converted into Cornwall's premier hotel and conference centre, according to the brochure managed by my brother-in-law Trevor Rutherford. This had been my father's solution to the problem of what to do with Trevor when he sold off the chain of 6 Napier's department stores with Grant's inheritance from Uncle Joshua had helped him establish in the 50s. He had done that almost as soon as death had neutralised her veto on such a conservative move, and retired with my mum to Jersey. A few years later, realising Cornwall really did have a claim on their souls, they moved back to what must still be the most desirable residence on the Helford estuary. Trudeau House Hotel had meanwhile begun to live up to its reputation, thanks more to my sister Pam's organisation ability than any managerial excellence on Trevor's part. The hotel was closed for the weekend so that the vast gatherings of friends, relatives and business associates could reveal our hospitality, and on Saturday morning, reluctantly obedient to Pam's summons, I drove down from Pangbourne to join in the merrymaking. I'd given the stag a tune-up for the journey and made it 4 hours dead. Little short of a record in those days. Pam had wanted me to go down on Friday, but I'd claimed an open top drive against the locals. Just what I needed to blow away some end of week cobwebs. That was an excuse, of course, as I'm sure she realised. I couldn't boycott an event of this magnitude, but I couldn't minimise my exposure to it. Her last-minute arrival and a prompt departure the following afternoon. I had it all planned. I'd be there, but with any luck, I feel as if I hadn't been. There'd been a pretty classic falling out between me and my dad. It went back 20 years too, when I'd walked out on a managerial traineeship at the Plymouth store, and the generous allowance with which he rewarded filial obedience. I was making a living now, not a bad one, but there had been times too many for comfort when I hadn't. I'd not asked to be helped out of any of that, and Dad hadn't offered. Pride got in the way of both sides. He wanted me to admit my mistakes without acknowledging any of his own, and he probably thought I wanted the same of him. So an armed truce was what we got. It left me with a unique status in recent generations of my family. That more or less self-made man, self-remade, was actually nearer the mark in view of a sustained attempt at drinking myself to death in the late 60s. But the upshot was the same. I wasn't in and I wasn't out. I was one of them, but it didn't feel much like it to them or to me. Something of the same ambience characterized my relationship with the city of my birth. Sure as both what you expect and what you don't get. What you don't of a cathedral city at the damp and distant tip of the southwest peninsula. A place of long, steep, curving hills, of bright light falling on rain-washed stone, of Georgian elegance, cheek by drought with mulchy warehouse and muddy walls, of poverty and deprivation crammed in with the tourism and the Celtic romance and the strange, stubborn sense of meaning. None of the features of it I can readily picture. The huge outer-scale cathedral, the viaduct soaring above Victoria Park, my old school high on its hill to the south, the house in Crescent Road where I was born, Trudeau House itself, none of them were much more than 100 years old then. Yet what I carry with me of terror and can neither discard nor visualize seems both older and stronger. We Napiers are partially incomers. One of the grandfather Napier's principal attraction, as far as my grandmother was concerned, was that he wasn't a Cornish man, but the Cornworths were as Cornish as saffron cakes. Their Turonian roots lie deep, and some stem reaches me, however far or long I stay. All this rendered any visit of mine to Trudeau's house a venture into well-charted waters, and there was none the less turbulence. It stood bowered in trees near the top of the hill with the St. Austell Road, a Gothic mansion that must have looked stark and ugly when built for Sir Reginald Pencavel, the China clay magnate, back in the 1870s. But the maturing of the grounds and the weathering of the sandstone had given it a sort of a quiet avuncularity, like an old acquaintance you suddenly realise has become a friend. The last of the Pencavels was killed on the Somme. When his widow remarried in 1920, she put the house up for sale. Its buyer was a prodigal son of the city, my great-uncle Joshua Carnaworth, who had just returned from a long and self-imposed exile in the goldfields of North America, with a great fortune that anyone had thought him capable of amassing. The purchase of Trudeau House was both a rebuke to his doubting contemporaries and a declaration that his wandering days were over. He was 47, too young, I'd have said, for subsiding into Cornish squiredom, but he had reasons enough, a narrower way of knowing that those reasons would one day conspire to destroy him. I was glad in a way that the house had become a busier, brusher place, since it had ceased to be my house, my home. A modern conference suite to the rear, a car parking lot had been the orchard and a scatter of signposts, and security lights programming its commercial identity in a way that subdued more personal memories without ever quite erasing them. Even weddings had become a regular branch of the business, though none of the receptions laid on 4 clients could ever have required a larger, pinker draped golden ribbon marquee than the one I glimpsed through the trees as I sped past in the stag that morning en route to the church. The ceremony went off flawlessly, without so much as a fluffed line, and was followed by a mass transit to Trudella House, with so many people eager to congratulate the bride and the grandparents. Pam, distracted by her responsibility as hostess, and Trevor having for once a good excuse to ignore me, I drifted with little resistance to the margin of the events. An hour at least of champagne and canapes loomed ahead for a informed alcoholic on edge of terms with his relatives. This promised to be a torturous interlude, so I took myself off as discreetly as possible to a shady corner of the lawn, propping myself against the croquet bench that had been moved out of harm's way beneath the beech tree, and gazed back at the party. Laughter mixed rippled with the jazz band's lazy melodies in the still summer air. Colourful outfits swirled like a slowly wound kaleidoscope in the hazy sunshine. Lights sparkled on champagne flutes. Joy, pleasure, and satisfaction mingled, and trying desperately not to feel dog in the mangerish. I toasted them all with orange juice. My parents, along with the bride and groom, were out of sight within the marquee. They'd still be busy greeting the guests, and I knew they'd be doing it with tireless aplomb. Gran had trained my father well in the social obligations that went with the status she'd carve out for him. She taught him to project a bluff, glan-handed image of himself that had smoothed his path in the world of big business and local politics. It was an image of old age, seemed only to have strengthened. You need to have been close to him to see and know a different kind of man. But my mother has been closer than anyone for the past 50 years, and I knew her devotion to him was no act. So I reckoned there must have always been more that was genuine to him than I'd prepared to admit. I suspected Gran had maneuvered them into marriage in the first place. The provision of a wife for her son and a mother of his grandchildren wasn't something she'd have left to chance, that's for certain. But if so, her manoeuvring had paid off as usual. I never had cause to doubt that my parents loved each other. The only question in my mind was whether they truly loved me. Pam would have dismissed such an idea as nonsense, and with good reason. Her upbringing had turned her into a practical and affectionate woman with a daughter who was a credit to her. Tabitha had her mother's shrewdness and clarity of vision, as well as her fine-boned looks and graceful bearing. I caught sight of the father of the bride then, moving artfully throughout the crowd. Middle age had improved Trevor, smoothing out the gauntness and security I remembered from when Pam had first introduced me to him. The public relations side of hotel management was something he excelled in. He clearly agreed with him. He drank heavily without showing off any ill effects, which naturally I hugely resented, while secretly regarding him as a fool, which was in turn what he probably thought me, and both of us could have called on some substantial evidence to support our claim. I don't think I heard anything to make me look around at that moment. Maybe I sensed that I wasn't the only one observing the scene, that a change had occurred, a thread had pulled into the fabric of the day. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter anyway. The fact is I did look around and saw a man standing beneath the stretching branch of the old horse chestnut that dominated the northeast side of the garden. He was about my height, but thinner, with a matted grey hair and beard. His clothes were ragged and dusty, threadbare jeans, and he had an open-neck shirt worn beneath an old mackintosh. The mac was what made me think he must be a tramp. Who else would wear one on such a sunny day? He was trembling too, which couldn't be from the cold. His face was in shadow, but I had the impression he was looking at me rather than the wedding party spilling out across the lawn. I stood upright and rounded the bench. As I did so, he took a step towards me, a step that carried him into a pool of sunlight. I saw his face clearly for the first time. If he was a tramp, he'd not been on the road long. His eyes weren't dull enough. His skin wasn't rough enough. I felt instinctively that I knew him, but I didn't trust the instinct. His mouth twitched a smile or grimace. It was hard to tell which. He mumbled something. Even with the noise of the reception, it would have been difficult to catch. But catch it I did. Chris, my name, spoken by somebody could no longer take for a stranger. Do I know you? I said, frowning. Then he did smile, lopsidedly and familiarly. He glanced up the thick bough of the horse chestnut above his head, raised his arms slowly towards it, and moved them back and forth, miming the action of someone propelling himself on a swing suspended from the branch. I felt my mouth drop open, remembering how I swung from that very branch as a child, how my boyhood friend Nikki Landon and I had. Nikki I should have known at once. Between the ages of 7 and 11, I suppose we spent more time with each other than any other single person. We'd seen the most inseparable of pals for those 4 years, straddling the end of the war. Chris and Nikki and Chris, but all had ended in the summer of 1947, all that and much more. Is it you? I hadn't seen him for 34 years. I'd done my very best to forget him, but forgetfulness, I realised as I looked at him, was only a pretense. I remembered him as if shabby middle age was merely a disguise he'd cast off at any moment, as if the 11-year-old boy he'd once been could step suddenly into view, hair shorn, eyes sparkling, face tanned by a Cornish summer, shirt hatched from some woodland scramble, trousers grass-stained, knees muddied, socks rumbled, shoes scuffed, as if every fragment of a lost friendship could be miraculously gathered and assembled. There was a moment, a fleeting instant, when I was happy, so very happy to see him. The guilt and caution and something like contempt rushed to defend my part in his ostracism. I felt myself stiffen and draw back, then saw him flinch as if he had watched the portcullis slam down between us. What are you doing here? My tone had altered without my meaning it to. It must have sounded odd, cold and stiff and forbidding. Came to see, he spoke slowly, slurring the words. His gaze lingered on me with a strange, mild curiosity. Came to see you? Me? Read about this. He tugged what looked like a scrap of newspaper from the pocket of his smack and held it up. I took it for a cutting from a local paper and guessed Trevor might have inserted some notice about the wedding. But what was Nicky's interest in? He didn't even live in the area, did he? Knew you'd be here. You'd have been waiting for me. Mum's dead. Your mother? I'm sorry. My sister too. Nicky's younger sister Frida had died of whooping cough during the war, mentioning her death, of which he must have known I was aware, seemed pointless, if not perverse. But I assumed it had some significance. Only he could understand. What do you want, Nicky? Mum and Dad together. Perhaps they are now. Not with me. When did your mother die? 6 months ago. He stuffed the strip of paper back into his pocket. Cancer. I'm sorry to hear that. His gaze hardened. Why should you be? Because I liked her. Liar. It's true. Liar. He shouted the word this time, his face flushed with a rush of anger. Liar! Calm down, for God's sake. Why should I? This is my niece's wedding day. We don't want any unpleasantness. I regret the words as soon as I used them. His own life had contained more than enough unpleasantness, and you're certain he wanted none of that either. What are you doing these days? Looking for what? The answer to what? You know? No, I don't. But do you know the answer, do you, Chris? The answer to what? Who killed my father? The question was so bizarre, yet so evidently insincere, that I simply stared at him in response, trying to read in his despairing gaze the harshness of the road he'd trodden since the summer of 1947. Who did it? What the hell's going on? Trevor's voice raised and peremptory cut through the seclusion of our exchanges. I turned around and saw him striding towards us, drinking and disapproval darkening his expression. What's the shouting about? Nothing. It's all right. There's no need. Who's he? Trevor glared past at Nicky. Looks like some bloody doser. Nothing of the kind. I can. This is a private party, said Trevor, cutting across me. Get the hell out of here. Hold on, Trevor, you don't understand. But lack of understanding had never restrained my brother-in-law. He marched towards Nicky, one arm gesturing in the direction of the road. Nicky stumbled back, raised his hands, and lowered his head, submissively. Sorrow and guilt glanced into me at this show of weakness. I called his name, but it was too late. He turned and began to run, stripping beneath the branches and heading for the part of the ward he had often scoured towards the boy with Trevor in token pursuit. There was no contest. Nicky ran like a fox before the hounds, vanishing to the deep shade of the tree. In my mind's eye, I saw him climb up by the remembering footholds up into the wall, drop down the other side, descend the bank to the pavement below, and then jog away along the road. The bastard's gone, pant Trevor as he rejoined by the bench. Legged it. So I see you should have sent him packing yourself. Drunks and derelicts, you can't afford to give them any encouragement. He was as sober as I am, and no derelict. You've talked to it as if he was a friend of yours from Alcoholics Anonymous. A friend, yes. Well, as a matter of fact, he is, I sighed. Or what? A friend of yours? Should I know him then? In a sense, you do. Really? What's his name? Nicky Lanyon. Lanyon? Yes, son of Michael Lanyon. What? The man who... That's right, the man they hanged for Uncle Joshua's murder. The man they hanged for Uncle Joshua's murder? The phrase logged in my mind, with dormant recollections clinging to it like cobwebs in a musty old signpost. Trevor hadn't known us in 1947, hadn't even lived in Cornwall. To him, the Lanyons were just an irrelevant piece of second-hand history. Even so, he didn't want their name mentioned on a day set aside to celebrate our family. He was aware that Lanyons represent nothing so substantial as a threat, but something unsatisfactory, unresolved, and faintly disturbing. Nicky's presence in church didn't worry him, but he'd have a preference. He'd have preferred him to be somewhere else, anywhere else, in fact. Let's keep this to ourselves, shall we, Chris? He said as they walked back across the lawn. It's the last thing Melbourne and needed to hear about on their anniversary. The reference to my parents was a direct appeal to my sense of family responsibility, but I suspect that Mum and Dad weren't the people he was really worried about, as he tactily went on to admit, and I don't want anything to spoil the day for Tabs. Would she even recognise the name? Probably not, but I like to keep it that way. What about Dominic? Does he know how we inherited this place? Trevor pulled up sharply, and I stopped as well and turned to look at him. His expression suggested that he was trying hard not to be riled. In a couple of hours, my daughter and my son-in-law will be on their way to Mauritius for their honeymoon. It is asking too much. Is it asking too much for you to do best to make sure they get a happy send-off? No, I'm not. I gave him a man, so let's forget about Nicky. I reckon we've seen the last of him. I did rather well, if I say so myself. I discovered the secret of how to amuse Dominic's mother. Nearly sold his father to the Bentley Continental, then taking pride of placing my showroom back in Pangdong. Made an impromptu speech with me, blending the role of grateful son and grateful uncle, and generally threw myself enthusiastically into the proceedings. I saw Mum and Dad share at least one glance of pleasurable surprise at my contribution, and was happy they shouldn't have the faintest idea what lay behind it. I was trying my damnedest to shake off the guilt and shame that Nicky's sudden appearance had left me with. I was trying to shake them off before I had too long to wonder why I should be prey to them in the first place. By late evening, I'd more or less succeeded. Tabitha and Dominic had departed from Mauritius, and the disco laid on for their friends and began to wind down. My mother had started to tire, but my father still seemed to enjoy himself, so I suggested a frame of snooker before they went home, knowing how much he relished being a younger opponent. He rose to the challenge, and we took ourselves off to the billiards room, mercifully distant from the beat of the band. The room was kept up for the use of guests, but was pretty much as it had always been, with a full-size table, original leather seating, and faded hunting prints around the walls. The setting made me think of Uncle Joshua, despite his disdain for all things sporting. Even so, it was a nostalgic bent on my father's conversation as he plodded around the table, building a break that undermined my resistance to memories of Nicky Lanyon and his father. It's been a great day, really has. Your mother's had a wonderful time, so have I. Far cry from our wedding day, I can tell you. Oh yes, very different. In what way? Well, it was the middle of the Depression then, wasn't it? We were living in Carclew Street, didn't move to Crescent Road until after Pam was born, and the shop was really only ticking by. There wasn't enough money to throw around taking honeymoons on the other side of the world. Your mother and I had 3 days in Penzance. 3 days, can you believe it? I chuckled. I think so. As for the reception, that was in a function room at the Royal. No marquee on the lawn up here for us. But Uncle Joshua was at the wedding. I've seen him in the photographs. Oh yeah, he was there, all right, looking down his nose at me and your mother. He was never the type to. What would you know? Dad straightened up from squinting along his cue to look at me. You never saw the hard side of his nature. He could have done something more for us than just turn up to the wedding, couldn't he? He had money to spare in a big house here to ride around. But did he ever offer to help us out? Did he? Hell, he helped us in the end, though, didn't he? Inadvertently, I mean, he got himself murdered by the man who stood to inherit everything. The money and the house, yes, the fire look came into his father's eyes. So he did, Michael Lanyon. I know his name, boy. I know it well. Funny, isn't it? Why hadn't it occurred to me sooner? That's what Nicky must have been thinking as he watched the grand and wealthy people admiring each other on the lawn, that they could have been his friends, attending a party at his own, eating his food, drinking his champagne, but for his father's conviction for the murder of Joshua Cunworth, because the Lord doesn't allow murderer to profit from his crime by inheriting his victim's estate, though it does allow his son to be ordered of what would otherwise be his property without compunction. What's funny, how things turn out. Dad's potty went off to the boil after that, but mine did too, so he still won comfortably. He went back to the lounge where Mum had fallen asleep and Trevor was swift as falling to drive them home. After they'd gone, I planned to stage a speedy retreat to bed, but Pam insisted I have some coffee with her, and somehow I felt sure it wasn't for the pleasure of comparing notes on Tabitha's going away outfit. Trevor told me about Nicky. Did he? What's he doing in Truro? I've no idea. He was your friend. You make this sound like an accusation. I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I'm tired and I wouldn't want anything to mar the day. Nothing has marred it. No, but what is a coincidence, do you think? Him showing up here this afternoon? Not sure. He said he'd read about the event. Shift round. That must be the piece in last week's West Brighton. Mum and Dad's golden wedding, tied to some free publicity and our reception facility. Trevor thought it was a good idea. But you didn't? Well, they hadn't actually got to the day then. Had they? And Tabs and Dominic. I just thought it could have been better. Left till afterwards, she sighed. I don't believe in tempting Providence. Don't worry, it looks like Providence has resisted temptation. Let's hope so. She gazed at me with sisterly concern. Was it a shock seeing him after all these years? Naturally. How did he look? Rough. How did he seem? Confused, fuddled, distressed? Not at all, Trevor reckoned. Maybe not. Where's he living now? He didn't say. Nor why he's come back? No, I lied solemnly. Not a hint. I didn't dream about Nicky that night, which was a victory in itself. I slept soundly in the room I'd occupied when he moved into Trudell House, early 1948. It was a sentiment gestured on Pam's part allocated to me. She wasn't to know I had preferred a room with a few footholds in the past. When I woke early to bird songs and the trafficless hush of Sunday morning, I found myself recalling the day of the move from Crestwood Road. Gran had planned it like a military campaign and must have been pleased by how smoothly it went. She had long enough to refine her plans, of course. She known would end up there since Uncle Josh's death the previous August, assuming the man he'd willed the house to was convicted of his murder. In due course he was. It was then already nearly 6 months since I'd seen Nicky. 6 months that were to stretch to 30 years, thin and hard across our adolescence and adulthood. Even then, he was lost to me, and I was glad. It meant I could do whatever everybody wanted me to do, forget him. Looking back, I could forgive my behaviour. The enormity of murder, the black stain on my friend's vicarious part in it, would have suborned most 11 years old, especially when my family and half of Truro seemed so happy to fasten guilt by association on all the Lanyons, whatever their age. But that wouldn't do anymore. I was no longer a child. I had all my adult life to track down Nicky and learn if I could help him cope with having a murderer for a father, but I hadn't. Instead, I let him track me down. I took a shower, put some clothes on and walked out into the ground, confident that nobody else would be up and around about so early. The marquee was still in place. The lawn was littered with paper serviettes, discarded cocktail sticks, cigarette burns, champagne corks, and miniature drifts of confetti blown across from the drive in the course of the night. The craters would be back later to clear up, but for the moment everything was still and desolate, yet strangely peaceful. I found myself wishing that Nicky would arrive now, when I was prepared for him and free to speak as I wanted, when there was nobody to object or interfere. I followed the path the long way around the lawn towards the spot where I'd seen him the previous afternoon, hoping somehow that he'd come back and was waiting to give me a second chance. It wasn't much of a hope, more fantasy really. Life doles out second chances with a sparing hand. I knew that. It's why I started in surprise when I first made out the figure beneath the horse chestnut tree. I raised my hand and quickened my pace, smiling uncertainly, but there was no response, and as I neared the top of the rise between us, I saw why more clearly. With every hurrying step, there was somebody there, dressed like Nicky. He wasn't standing and he wasn't swinging either. He was hanging by a single length of rope from the bow. I seen Nicky stretch his hand towards, hanging with limbs, head bowed and feet dangling. Thanks for listening.